Richard Alden woke before sunrise on the morning of his 50th birthday. The city below his penthouse lay quiet in the pale dawn light. He stood by the tall windows, looking out over streets that bustled each day with cars and people, but now seemed still and empty. Felt a strange ache in his chest, a hollow space that no promise of wealth could fill. He stepped away from the window and walked across the marble floor, his footsteps echoing in the vast room. Everywhere he looked, there were signs of success: polished glass tables, expensive paintings on the walls, and a grand piano in the corner that rarely got played. The air smelled faintly of fresh flowers and arrangement he had ordered for the day, but even that felt lonely, as if beauty itself could not comfort him. In the kitchen, he made himself a cup of strong coffee. The machine hissed and steamed, and the rich aroma filled the room. He poured the dark liquid into a fine china mug, then carried it to the large dining table. On the table lay several unopened gifts: a watchbox from his business partner, a leather-bound book from a distant cousin, a jar of rare chocolates from a client. Each present was wrapped in elegant paper with perfect ribbons. But none had a card inside that said, "Happy birthday, my friend." He sat down slowly and stared at a fancy cake in a glass dome. It had arrived early that morning from the city's best bakery. The cake was 3 layers high, frosted with smooth cream and adorned with edible gold leaf. It looked magnificent, but he knew it was just a display of wealth. He lifted the dome lid and breathed in the sweet scent. He took a small taste, letting the sugar dissolve on his tongue. It was delicious, but it did not warm his heart. He thought back to the first birthday he could remember. He was 10 years old then, living in a small house on a quiet street. His mother had baked a simple cake from a box mix. It had uneven frosting and a few crushed strawberries on top. But he remembered how she smiled when she put the candles in it, how her eyes shone as she sang happy birthday and hugged him tight. That memory felt like a fragile treasure he had buried deep inside himself. His phone buzzed on the table. He reached for it, hoping for a message from a friend. Instead, there was a text from his assistant: "All confirmations are regrets. No one can make it today." He set the phone down with a sigh. The words stung more than he expected. Had invited close friends, old college roommates, people he had known for years, but life had pulled them away. Business trips, family obligations, health issues each. Excuse sounded valid, yet he felt the loneliness grow. He poured more coffee and walked to the living room. He passed a trophy case filled with awards he had won over the years: Best Entrepreneur Under 40, Innovative Leader of the Year, Philanthropist of the Decade. They all stood on polished wood shelves, gleaming under soft lights. He had earned every one of those awards. He had built his fortune through hard work and smart decisions. Yet now he realized that success meant little if he had no one to share it with. He sat on a leather sofa and closed his eyes. He tried to imagine the laughter of friends, the warmth of family gathered around him, the surprise of a door bursting open with shouts of happy birthday. But the room stayed silent. His breathing felt loud in his own ears. He wondered when his life had become like this, a silent performance on a grand stage with no audience. A soft sound pulled him from his thoughts. He heard voices in the hall. Outside his door to guards, and a young girl's gentle plea. He frowned, surprised to hear anyone at that hour. He walked to the door and opened it quietly. In the hallway stood Maria, a street vendor he had seen on the sidewalk below. She held a simple cardboard box with a homemade cake inside. Her clothes were neat but worn. Her eyes met his with a mix of hope and nervousness. "Good morning, sir," she said softly. Her voice trembled a little. Richard stared at the box. The cake inside was small and uneven, covered in bright pink frosting. It looked nothing like the perfect cake under the dome. But there was something honest and real about it, he remembered. His mother's cake all those years ago. He noticed how Maria's eyes shone with determination. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. The guards looked surprised but let her pass. She stood awkwardly in the foyer, clutching the box as if it held her whole world. He led her into the dining room. He gestured toward a chair and she sat, placing the cake carefully on the table. He turned on a small lamp so the room felt warmer. Then he poured 2 cups of coffee. For himself, strong as usual. For her, he added a little milk. They sat across from each other. He saw her hands were small and rough from work. He saw a few freckles on her cheeks and a timid smile that made him feel uneasy and grateful at the same time. He lifted the lid of her cake and turned it so he could see her handiwork. It was lopsided, with a few stray crumbs falling onto the table. He reached out and took a bite. The cake was soft and sweet, with hints of vanilla and a slightly tangy frosting. "Thank you," he said. "This is wonderful." She smiled, and he noticed her braces on her teeth. "My mother showed me how," she said. "I used some of my earnings to buy the sugar and flour. I wanted to do something special for you." He felt a lump in his throat. He did not know what to say. He had never received a gift like this from someone who needed money more than he did. He swallowed hard and offered her a plate. She shook her head, but he insisted. She peeled back her sleeves and let him serve her a slice. Then he took another piece himself. They ate in silence for a moment. Then she spoke again. "My grandmother works here as a cleaner," she said softly. "She told me once that you gave her extra pay when she was sick. She said you were kind." He remembered that day. A few months ago, he had noticed the cleaner coughing in the hallway. He called his assistant and asked her to send medical help and a week of paid leave. He had not given it much thought then. He only did what he thought was right. Hearing it now through Maria's words made him realize how easy it was to do small acts of kindness. He had expected grand gestures, but this was the real thing. Cleared his throat. "Your grandmother's wonderful," he said. "And you are too." She looked down, blushing. Then she looked back up and asked, "Do you like it?" He nodded, smiling. "I like it very much." He swept up the unopened cards and gifts. He tore open the watch box and placed the timepiece on her wrist. It was too big, but he tightened the strap as best he could. "This is for you," he said. "You deserve something nice." Her eyes widened, but he lifted a hand to stop her protest. "Please," she bit her lip and said, "Thank you, sir." We poured more coffee, and they sat together like old friends. The skyline turned golden as the sun rose. The emptiness that had filled the room began to dissolve, replaced by something new, a spark of connection that neither wealth nor fame could buy. Richard felt warmth seep back into his chest. He realized that today, on his birthday, he had been given the greatest gift of all, a chance to remember what truly mattered. Richard felt something stir inside him as he watched Maria tuck the last crumbs of cake into her mouth. He realized he did not know much about her, only that she worked hard on the street and came here with a gift. He set his cup down and leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "Tell me more about you," he said gently. "How did you learn to bake?" Maria looked at him with surprise. No one of his status had ever asked her that before. She folded her hands in her lap and spoke slowly, choosing simple words. "Mother taught me," she said. "Back home in our village, she baked every week. We used to sit around the fire and watch her mix flour and water. She always smiled when she saw me helping." Richard nodded, picturing a small kitchen lit by flames and laughter echoing against rough walls. He could almost smell the wood smoke and dough rising. "Your village must be far," he said. "Hundreds of miles," she replied. "My grandmother. She sells flowers here. I come too, to help. Some days, I stay in an old room with 4 of us. We share one bed." She smiled bravely, as if shame could not touch her. He swallowed hard. He had never known hunger or fear. He had never slept on the floor or worked before dawn. His world of silk sheets and quiet hallways felt like another life. He realized how little he knew of the world beyond his penthouse windows. "Would you like a tour?" he asked, surprising himself. Maria blinked. "A tour?" He stood and said, "Yes. I would like to show you my world, if you would let me." She hesitated, but then nodded. He patted the seat next to him. "Put on this coat," he said, draping a light blazer over her thin shoulders. It was too big, but it would keep her warm. They left the table, and Richard held the cake box. He led her to the living room. The city was waking up now. Cars whirred, people walked below, and the sun spilled gold across the buildings. He opened the blinds wider. "This is the view from my home," he said. She pressed her palm against the glass and stared at the distant streets. They looked different from where she stood yesterday, crowded and unforgiving. Here they seemed small and kind, bathed in morning light. He led her to the grand piano. "I learned to play when I was a boy," he said, lifting the lid and letting her peek inside. "Would you like to hear a song?" She nodded shyly. He sat at the bench and played a gentle melody. His fingers danced across the keys, filling the room with soft notes. Maria closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. For a moment, all the noise of the city faded away, and there was only that melody. When the last chord faded, she applauded softly. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He smiled and stood. "Thank you for sharing your cake. In return, I want to share my music." They walked toward the door. "Come with me," he said. "Let's go outside." They stepped into the hallway. The guards bowed their heads but did not speak. Richard nodded, and the doors opened onto a private elevator. Silence surrounded them as the car carried them down. Outside on the street, the air was cool. Vendors called out their prices. The city was alive with energy. Richard and Maria walked side by side, both a little unsure of how to move through each other's worlds. He noticed how people looked at him, some with respect, others with envy. He noticed how they looked at Maria sometimes with pity, sometimes with curiosity. He wanted to protect her, yet he wanted her to see everything as it was. He led her to a flower stall. "You sell flowers here?" he asked. She pointed to the brightly colored blooms. "Yes, mornings are sweet. But afternoons, customers leave." She tapped her temple. "They get tired or they spend money on other things." He bent down to pick a single yellow rose. "This is lovely," he said, handing it to her. She held it as if it were a treasure. "Thank you," she said. He walked her through a busy market square. He saw children in ragged clothes chasing a stray dog, old men playing chess on overturned crates, cooks stirring giant pots of porridge. He saw poverty and struggle, but also warmth and laughter. It was a world he only glimpsed from above. Maria led him to a narrow alley where her grandmother lived. A small door opened into a dark room where an elderly woman sat on a low stool, stringing beads. She looked up and gasped when she saw Richard. "Thank you for helping me," she said, bowing her head. "You saved my life when I was ill." He smiled softly. "Please, call me Richard." She motioned for Maria to come close. The three of them shared a humble bowl of soup Maria had brought. The flavor was simple: carrots, onions, water, but it warmed Richard in a way his finest meals never had. When they finished, he said, "I want you both to come to my home this weekend. I will cook for you." Maria's grandmother touched his hand. "You are too kind." He shook his head. "No, it's my honor." They said goodbye, and he took Maria's hand as they walked back to his car. The drive was quiet. Maria looked out the window, lost in thought. He glanced at her and wondered what she saw in this gleaming world of steel and glass. Back in the penthouse, he helped her remove his coat. He poured water into 2 glasses. As she drank, he spoke. "I never knew what I was missing," he said. Softly, "I thought I had everything, but I was wrong. I see now that what matters is sharing life with others." She smiled, setting her glass on the table. "Thank you for today," she said. "I never dreamed I would see the world this way." She stood to leave. He walked her to the door. But before she stepped into the hallway, he held out the cake box. "Take this home," he said. "I want you to remember today, and I want me to remember you." She clutched the box, her eyes filling with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. He watched her go, feeling a warmth he had not felt in years. He closed the door gently and leaned against it. The day had begun as another lonely birthday, but now it held promise. He felt a kind of happiness that came not from his wealth, but from this simple connection. He returned to the living room and looked out at the sunset sky. He realized that life was richer when shared, and he knew that tomorrow and the days after would never be the same. Richard woke the next morning with the memory of Maria's smile still warm in his mind. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of his penthouse, painting golden lines on the marble floor. He dressed quickly in casual clothes, a soft sweater, and jeans, and made his way downstairs. Today he had arranged something special. In the grand foyer, he met Maria and her grandmother. Maria held a small suitcase and wore the light blazer he had lent her. Her grandmother carried a cloth bag with a few homemade loaves of bread. They both looked nervous, but excited. Richard guided them toward the garage, where a sleek black SUV waited. He helped them inside, then climbed in beside them. As the engine hummed to life, Maria's grandmother thanked him again for yesterday's help. Richard smiled and assured her that it was his pleasure. The drive out of the city was smooth. Through the tinted windows, Maria and her grandmother watched tall buildings give way to green fields, then to rolling hills dotted with trees. Birds sang along the road, and patches of wildflowers nodded in the breeze. Richard pointed out landmarks. Old Stone Bridge, the family farm where he spent childhood summers. Maria listened, eyes shining with curiosity. After an hour, they reached a large estate surrounded by orchards and gardens. The main house was built of warm brick and had wide porches with white railings. A low stone wall marked the edge of a terrace where a fountain bubbled softly. Richard parked near a side door that led directly to the kitchen, opened it, and welcomed them inside. The kitchen was bright and airy, with long marble counters, copper pots hanging from hooks, and a massive oven that glowed with warmth. On the counters lay bowls of flour, sugar, eggs, and colorful sprinkles. A team of cooks bustled about, chopping fruit, stirring batters, and wiping surfaces. At the center stood Chef Simone, a tall woman with a crisp white hat and an expression that mixed curiosity with a hint of skepticism. Richard smiled and introduced Maria. Chef Simone is Maria Lopez. She baked a wonderful cake for me on my birthday. I thought it only fair to give her the chance to learn from the best. Chef Simone raised an eyebrow but offered a polite nod. Maria swallowed and stepped forward. Richard placed her small suitcase on a stool and patted her shoulder. This week, you will be my guest intern. You will learn how to bake in a professional kitchen. Maria's eyes lit up. Thank you, sir. I promise I will work hard. Chef Simone set down a whisk and approached. She measured Maria from head to toe, then handed her a crisp white apron. It was almost too long, but Maria tied it carefully around her waist. Simone showed her how to scrub her hands, tie back her hair, and stand ready at the counter. Richard watched, pride shining in his eyes. First task, Simone said. We need to make 50 cupcakes for tomorrow's charity event, she handed. Maria, a bowl of cake batter. Fold this mixture gently and spoon it into the liners. Learn fast, the clock is ticking. Maria nodded and began to work. Her hands moved with surprising skill. She poured the batter into paper cups, keeping them even and neat. Simone observed silently, then a small smile curved her lips. Richard felt a rush of joy at Maria's focus and grace. While Maria baked, Richard wandered through the orchard, picked a ripe peach and bit into its juicy flesh. The sweet juice ran down his chin, reminding him of summers long ago, when life was simple and his mother's laughter filled the air. He realized how far he had drifted from that world of warmth, back in the kitchen. Maria finished the cupcakes and set them on a tray. Simone praised her work. Well done, she said. Tomorrow, you'll decorate them. Maria blushed and thanked her. Richard clapped softly, drawing the cook's attention. They all paused and looked at Maria, then at Richard, as if learning that true talent could come from unexpected places. Later, Richard guided Maria and her grandmother through the rest of the estate. They saw rows of grapevines heavy with fruit, fields of lavender that swayed in waves, and a pond where ducks swam in lazy circles. At each stop, he explained how the estate provided food for his city restaurants and supported local farmers. Maria's grandmother listened and nodded, pressed by his commitment to community. That evening, they sat down to dinner in a cozy dining room with warm wooden walls and soft candlelight. The table was set simply plain white plates, cloth, napkins, a pitcher of water, and fresh bread. Richard asked Maria to serve the dishes, and she did so with care and grace. As they ate roasted vegetables, soup, and fresh fish, they shared stories of their lives. Maria spoke of her dreams. She wanted to open a small bakery one day, to sell sweet treats to children and old people alike. She dreamed of a place where laughter and sugar mixed, where people came together to celebrate simple joys. Richard listened, his heart swelling. He secretly hoped he could help make her dream come true. His phone buzzed quietly. He glanced at the screen and saw a reminder, board meeting at 9 tomorrow. He sighed and set the phone aside. He knew that he had responsibilities, but tonight he chose to stay present. Tomorrow's meeting could wait until morning. After dinner, Richard showed Maria her room, a small guest suite with a comfortable bed, soft blankets, and a window overlooking the gardens. He placed a small gift on the nightstand, a baking journal with a leather cover. "For your recipes," he said. "Write down everything you learn." Maria opened it and smiled, her eyes filling with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "This is more than I could ever imagine." She hugged him gently, and he felt a warmth spread through his chest. That night, Richard lay awake for a while, listening to the distant sounds of owls in the trees and the gentle rush of wind through the leaves. He thought of his lonely penthouse, of trophies that meant nothing, of grand parties that left him empty. He realized that real value was not in the numbers in his bank account, but in the connections he made. The next morning, he woke to the sun shining on dew-covered petals. He dressed in a crisp shirt and blazer, preparing for his meeting. Maria and his grandmother helped him pack sandwiches and coffee in a picnic basket for the journey back. He hugged them both and promised to return soon. On the way back, the car sped down the highway. Maria stared out the window, clutching the baking journal to her chest. Richard watched her, sensing that something important was happening. He turned to her and said, "I have a meeting this morning. It is important, but I will be thinking of you." She nodded, understanding more than he expected. "Must," she said softly. "But remember what is important to you." Richard smiled at her words. They echoed his own thoughts, realized that his decisions tomorrow would shape not just his wealth but his life. He thought of Maria's dreams, and his own promise to help her. He felt a sense of purpose he had not known in years, at his penthouse. He kissed his grandmother on the cheek and sent her and Maria on their way, watched them disappear into the city crowds wearing his coat. Then he climbed the stairs too. His home office straightened his tie, and opened the laptop to join the video call. As the faces of board members appeared on the screen, Richard felt a calm confidence. He knew what he had to do. The numbers and projections would be discussed, but he would also speak of community, of kindness, of purpose beyond profit. He would show them that wealth was not an end in itself, but a means to create joy and support dreams. He looked at the clock. It was time. Took a deep breath, adjusted his jacket, and began the meeting. His voice was steady, his words clear, and in his mind, he heard Maria's voice telling him to remember what mattered. He would not forget. Tomorrow, he would share his new vision, for himself, and for the poor girl who had given him the best birthday of his life. ChatGPT said. Richard closed his laptop after the meeting and leaned back in his chair. He felt a surge of energy that had nothing to do with profit margins or stock prices. His mind was still on Maria and her simple hope of opening a bakery. He stood and walked to the window, looking down at the city streets. He decided there and then that his next birthday would be unlike any he had ever had before. The following week, invitations went out quietly. Not to old business associates or distant cousins, but to neighbors, building staff, and members of local charities. Messages were delivered by hand to the doorman, by phone to the janitorial staff, and by email to community leaders. The invitations were simple. Join him for cake and company on his birthday. No grand promises of luxuries, an honest celebration of connection. On the morning of his birthday, Richard woke before sunrise again, but this time he felt excitement instead of emptiness. He dressed in comfortable clothes, a soft shirt, well-worn jeans, and walked to the kitchen. There, Chef Simone and the team were already busy. Dozens of cakes, all different shapes and colors, lined the counters. Some had bright frosting, others were covered in fruit, and a few were simple, like Maria's first cake. Simone handed him a clipboard. "Here's the schedule," she said. "Maria will lead the decorating station." Maria arrived wearing a crisp apron and a shy smile. She hugged Richard tightly. He felt his heart swell at the sight of her confidence. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, glancing around at the busy kitchen. Outside the kitchen doors, the foyer filled with chairs and small tables. Colorful balloons bobbed near the ceiling. A banner read, "Happy Birthday, Richard," in letters that looked hand-painted. Under it stood a low table with bowls of fresh fruit, cheese platters, and pitchers of lemonade and water. There was no sparkling wine or imported caviar, just simple foods chosen to welcome everyone, no matter their story. As the clock neared 10, guests began to arrive. First came the cleaning staff. Maria's grandmother was among them. They wore bright smiles and carried small dishes of homemade treats, cookies, muffins, and even a small box of Maria's cupcakes. They placed their offerings on a side table, and Richard thanked each one by name. "You make this place feel like home," he said. Next came neighbors, people who lived in the same building but whom he had never properly met. An elderly couple with white hair brought a photo album filled with pictures of the city over decades, and a young family with 2 small boys brought a handmade card covered in crayon drawings. "For you," the little girl said, hugging its corner. Richard knelt to hug her back, feeling tears gather at the corners of his eyes. Local charity volunteers arrived too. Some handed him letters from families helped by his foundation. Others wore T-shirts with the charity logo and gave him flowers, picked from community gardens. Richard thanked each person warmly, asking about their lives and listening with genuine interest. Finally, a small group of journalists showed up, not expecting an ostentatious party, but curious about the event's unusual guest list. Richard greeted them at the door. "Today isn't about headlines," he said. "It's about community." He guided them to seats near the front, where they could watch without interrupting. At 10:30, Maria stepped forward to a small microphone set up by the fountain in the foyer. She wore her apron and held a piping bag filled with bright pink frosting. Richard stood beside her, beaming with pride. The crowd hushed. "Thank you all for coming," Maria began, her voice trembling at first, then steady. "Last year I gave Mr. Alden a cake for his birthday. He could have thrown it away, but he ate it canned." He smiled. "That smile changed both our lives." She paused and spotted her grandmother nodding proudly. "Today, we bake together. Please join us." She handed out frosting tools and spatulas. To the guests, Chef Simone and Richard helped guide people to long tables covered in parchment paper and lined with plain cakes. The team had prepared dozens of small sponge cakes in advance, so everyone could decorate one. Children smeared frosting and sprinkles. Elders carefully piped flowers. Volunteers worked in groups, laughing together. Richard tucked his sleeves up and sat at a table near the front. He took a cake and spread a pale yellow frosting across the top. A little boy shyly offered some blue sugar sprinkles. Richard accepted them gratefully, pressing them into the frosting. The boy's grin made him laugh. It was the first time he had felt truly happy at a birthday party. While they decorated, Maria moved among the tables, offering guidance. Her natural warmth put everyone at ease. At one table, a woman who worked in the building's mailroom concentrated on making neat frosting lines. Maria leaned down and whispered, "You're doing great." The woman's eyes lit up. At another table, a teenager who delivered packages created a funny frosting face. Maria giggled and named it Happy Richard. After the decorating, the guests carried their cakes to a long display table. It bowed under the weight of so many creations cakes covered in bright colors. Some with lumpy frosting, others with perfectly symmetrical flowers. Each cake held a story of a neighbor learning to decorate, of a child's first cake design, of a volunteer expressing thanks through sugar. Richard took the microphone. "I wanted this birthday to be different," he said, voice steady and clear. "Last year, I celebrated alone, even with a perfect cake. But today, with all of you, I see that happiness grows when shared." He looked around. "You've given me the greatest gift, your time, your stories, your hands in frosting. Thank you." Applause filled the foyer. Some people wiped tears from their eyes. The journalists scribbled notes, startled by the authenticity of the event. Cameras flashed not for luxury items, but for moments. A child smiling as frosting dripped. Off her nose, an elderly man's trembling hands shaping sugar flowers. Maria's radiant face as she watched. Soon, slices of cakes were distributed. People tasted each other's creations, passing on compliments. "Your pink frosting is so smooth. I love your little candy hearts." Laughter and chatter mingled with the clatter of forks. The atmosphere felt alive, warm and real. Meanwhile, Richard noticed a line forming at the lemonade station, joined behind a woman with tired eyes who said, "I work 2 jobs, but I wanted to be here. Never felt part of this community." Before he handed her a cup and smiled, "You're part of it now," he said. He wandered through the crowd, hugging old friends and new acquaintances alike. At one point he found himself beside Maria's grandmother, who held a cup of tea. She looked at him and said softly, "You have brought joy to many today." He took her hand. "No," he replied, "you have brought joy to me." As the celebration wound down, the guests started to leave, carrying their cakes and cakes of others. Richard and Maria stood by the door, offering goodbyes and hands to shake. Soon, only a handful of people remained: the cleaning staff, the cooks, the few neighbors who lived on the same floor. Richard gathered everyone together. "Thank you for your help," he said. "This day has been perfect because of you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out envelopes. He handed each staff member a letter. "This is for you," he said. Inside was a gift, a bonus, a promise of medical care, a scholarship fund, or a small loan, anything they needed most. Their gasps and tears of gratitude moved him deeply. Maria stood beside him, proud and emotional. He hugged her and whispered, "You have changed my life." She smiled, eyes bright. "You changed mine too," she said. That evening, after the last guest had gone, Richard and Maria sat together at a small table in the empty foyer. Maria's grandmother had long since returned home. The balloons drooped, the tables were bare, and the cakes were gone. Air still held the warmth of shared laughter. Richard poured 2 glasses of lemonade. "I think this is the best birthday I've ever had," he said. Maria nodded and raised her glass. "To friendship," she said. "To friendship," he echoed. They clinked glasses. Then they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset light gleam on the marble floor. Richard realized that this day marked a turning point. His life of solitude and gold had shifted into something richer, a life filled with purpose, with people whose stories mattered as much as his own. He looked at Maria and knew he would keep his promise to her. One day, she would have her bakery, full of laughter and sugar. And he would be there not as a distant benefactor, but as a friend, icing cakes beside her. Grateful for the day, a poor girl brought him a simple cake and changed his world forever. Richard woke early once more, but this morning he felt light and peaceful inside. The penthouse windows showed the first rays of sun dancing on nearby rooftops. He smiled as he remembered yesterday's celebration. His heart was full, and he rose quickly, eager to begin the day. He dressed in a simple shirt and trousers, then made his way to the kitchen. Chef Simone was already there, preparing ingredients for breakfast. Maria arrived moments later, carrying her baking journal. She looked bright-eyed and rested. Richard greeted her with a warm nod. They sat together at the kitchen counter, eating fresh fruit and warm bread. Maria opened her journal and showed him sketches of cake ideas she wanted to try. Her drawings were neat and hopeful. Richard admired her dedication as she explained how she planned flavors and colors for each design. The kitchen and walked to the small bakery space Richard had set up near the penthouse. It was modest, a single room with a counter, display shelves, and a small oven, but it was a start. Richard had converted an unused office into this bakery studio for Maria. He had chosen simple tile floors and soft lighting to make it feel cozy. Maria gasped when she saw the space. She ran her hand along the counter and breathed. "It's perfect." Richard smiled and patted her shoulder. "This is your place," he said. "You can bake here whenever you like." She unpacked her tools from the suitcase Richard had given her. Her rolling pin, piping bags, and measuring spoons all found a home on hooks and in drawers. She arranged them carefully, as if setting the stage for her dreams. Richard watched, feeling proud. They spent the morning baking bread loaves together. Richard mixed dough under Maria's guidance, learning how to knead and shape. Flour dusted his clothes and hands, and he laughed when a bit landed on his nose. Maria teased him gently, and he returned the favor by making a perfectly round loaf. She clapped and called it Master Baker Richard. They worked as a team, their laughter echoing in the small room. At midday, Richard led Maria to the living room. He opened a window so music could flow in. He sat at the piano and played a gentle tune he had composed for her. Maria listened, her eyes closed. When he finished, she applauded softly and hugged him. "Your music makes everything feel magical," she said. After lunch, they returned to the bakery room. Maria taught Richard how to color icings and pipe simple flowers. He fumbled at first, his frosting lines wobbly, but he improved with practice. Maria encouraged him with kind words. They decorated cookies and mini cakes, then arranged them on the display shelves. The sight of bright pastries against the clean, white walls filled the room with joy. That afternoon, Richard's grandmother arrived with fresh eggs from her farm and a basket of homegrown herbs. She had come to help Maria get started. Maria's face lit up when she saw her grandmother, and the older woman hugged her tightly. They spoke quietly in their native language, sharing smiles and plans. Richard slipped away to make a few phone calls, spoke with suppliers, arranged for weekly deliveries of flour and sugar, and contacted a local health inspector to certify the bakery space. He worked quickly, balancing details with a steady calm. By the time he returned, the space was almost ready for its first customers. As the sun dipped low, Richard and Maria prepared for a small opening. They set a sign outside the door. "Maria's Bakery grand opening tomorrow." They filled crates with samples of bread and pastries, tied ribbon bows around boxes, and lit a few candles to make the room glow warmly. They shared a quiet moment before leaving. Maria looked around the room, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm so grateful," she said. "Made my dream real." She smiled and took her hands. "You did the work," he said. "I only gave you the chance." She hugged him, and he hugged her back, both of them feeling the day's promise. That night, Richard lay in bed thinking of how much his life had changed. He recalled the lonely birthday breakfast when Maria first came with her small cake. He had been lost, surrounded by wealth but empty inside. Now, he was surrounded by hope and purpose. The next morning, the bakery's sign caught the early light. A small line of neighbors and building staff gathered outside, curious and excited. Chef Simone arrived to offer support, and Maria stood by the door in her crisp apron. Richard joined her, carrying a basket of hot bread. When the doors opened, the first customers stepped inside. They gasped at the warm smell of fresh baking. Maria greeted each one with a bright smile, helping them choose pastries. She offered samples and chatted about flavors. Richard handed out bread to people who could not afford any, and they thanked him with tearful smiles. The special guests from the charity came too. They brought their families, and children pointed at colorful cupcakes. Maria knelt to talk with them, explaining how each cake was made. She offered them a chance to decorate cookies after the official opening. Children's laughter filled the air as they squeezed frosting onto cookies and sprinkled sugar. A local reporter arrived with a small camera. He asked Maria why she had chosen baking. She spoke simply. "I love making people happy with sweet treats. Cake can bring a smile when you least expect it." He smiled at her answer and filmed her at work. By afternoon, the bakery room was filled with chatter and joy. The shelves held fewer treats than before, but the smiles were richer. Richard watched from the doorway, feeling a deep satisfaction he had never known. He made his way through the crowd, stopping to greet each person. They thanked him for helping Maria and for building this place of warmth. At last, Maria took a break. She wiped her hands on her apron and sighed happily. Richard handed her a cup of lemonade. They sat together on a small stool in the corner. She sipped and said, "This is everything I dreamed of." He nodded and said, "And more." That evening, after the bakery closed, Richard and Maria cleaned up together, packed away leftover pastries, and swept the floor. The room was quiet again, echoing only their footsteps. Maria turned to him and said, I want this bakery to be open every day." Richard smiled and said, "It will be." Months passed and Maria's bakery became a beloved spot. Building residents came for morning bread. Charity guests stopped by for coffee and cookies. Children decorated cupcakes on weekend workshops. Richard still played songs at the piano when he visited. Maria continued to learn new recipes, filling her journal with notes and hopes. Richard's life shifted completely. He scaled back his board role, choosing to focus on community projects and the bakery. His friends changed. They were neighbors, volunteers, people who shared genuine care. He no longer felt the ache of emptiness. Instead, he felt connected and alive. On the next birthday, Richard and Maria celebrated in the bakery. The room was decorated with ribbons and balloons. Maria baked the cake this time, a beautiful creation with fresh fruit and flowers. Richard blew out the candles, surrounded by community members, near and far. He made a wish to always remember the power of kindness and connection.
Oh, yeah.
As the last candle flickered out, he looked at Maria and the smiling faces around him. He knew. The journey that had begun with a poor girl's simple cake was far from over. It had grown into something lasting, a bond between two people, a community united, and a new life filled with purpose, love, the sweetest celebrations of all.